Have you ever trusted someone and gotten burned? Helped someone? Had your kindness repaid with suffering? Well, then you can relate to how I was feeling when I woke up in the blackness beneath the abandoned house in the woods. The rough stone floor was cold beneath me, and I struggled to focus, my aching head swimming in the darkness. Had I lost consciousness for a brief second? Yes, it seemed as if I had. We were in a house, I remembered that. But this wasn't a house. It was a terrible, dark, cavernous dungeon sort of place that I didn't like at all. Not one bit. And the sound of footsteps drawing nearer made my heart jackhammer with fear, knowing immediately that they did not belong to someone friendly. There had been an abandoned house in the woods. We had gone inside. Me, Brad, and Tom. Except there had been someone else with us. Ned. It all came flooding back to me in an instant, and with it came pounding, incessant pain in my temples. I tried to get into my feet and fell backwards off balance. The footsteps were getting closer. I tried to shake Brad and Tom, whispering to them, get up, there's someone coming." Tom grunted, looked like maybe he was going to wake up, but Brad just lay there looking pale and cold. He didn't make a sound, his breathing shallow and barely noticeable. The flame of a torch was getting closer, turning from a firefly into a candle wick in size, and I immediately hid. I ran to the first concealed place I could find, beneath the stone stairs just a few yards away, managing to wedge myself into the tight space just before the approaching men were within range to see me. "Looks like Nettie screwed up again," one of the men said, laughing. He kicked Tom with his shoe, and he groaned and blinked his eyes groggily, seeming not to understand what was happening. "He'll get it one of these days. Give him a break, he's just a kid." "Get him upstairs to the pitfall, that's all he's got to do. Pull the damn lever when they're in the bedroom, and we don't have to have these sorts of problems." He kicked Tom again, harder this time. "That's why we built the damn thing. Wouldn't have bothered if he was just going to keep shoving them down the stairs." "Yep, at least this one's knocked out cold." There were three of them, all dressed in long, hooded vermilion robes, the same color as the scrap of fabric we'd found beneath the hidden door in the bathroom. It was all starting to come together as I overheard them talking. Ned was the one who lured kids out into the forest to find the abandoned house. And they were making people disappear in the place, just like the stories we'd heard about in history class. But we weren't supposed to see the hidden door in the bathroom, I surmised. The last thing he'd said before we noticed the scrap of fabric and the scuff marks on the floor, indicating the secret passage was there, was that we should go check the upstairs. So the real trapdoor, or whatever it was that dropped people down to this dungeon, was actually up there, which meant the door we'd come through had not been used for its intended purpose. Was that the way these evil people got in and out of here? And if it was, maybe there was a latch or a lever that would let me out. Perhaps there was hope for me after all. But I couldn't just leave my friends. As scared as I was, I needed to see what was going to happen to them, and if I could still save them. Besides, Ned was still up in the house for all I knew. He hadn't followed us, and so had perhaps taken some other route down into the dungeon. There was also still a chance he was up there waiting for us to try and escape. I couldn't take the chance. The terrible headache was making it difficult to think. I couldn't focus and only knew that I wanted to try and help my friends, as terrified as I was. So when the three men picked up my friends and started to carry them away, I followed after at a distance, Felt as if I was unsafe no matter what I did, so my panicked mind instinctively wanted to try to stay with my friends and with the light. That's all I can say to justify it in retrospect. I wish I had just run and taken my chances up in the house with Ned, though, and I'll never be able to unsee the things that happened after that. I followed the men, dragging my friends away, quickly realizing I would have to keep track of each turn, as the maze-like subterranean tunnels seemed to go on forever. To help myself get back, I left a penny from my pocket, each left or right. Heads for left, tails for right. The place was ancient by the looks of it, and more elaborate than anyone could have imagined. There were hieroglyphics, murals, symbols, and colorful imagery was painted on the walls, but it could be barely glimpsed in the darkness. I got the impression that there was once a great society living beneath the ground here, unknown and unmentioned in the history books. The torchlight flickered and dissipated up ahead, and I had to pick up the pace to keep up with the men, terrified of being left alone in this dark maze, where I would no doubt roam lost forever. I realized when I heard Tom waking up and screaming that they were hurrying their pace because he was fighting and struggling with them. Suddenly they turned a corner and they were gone. I caught up and looked around the sharp rock wall to see a vast open chamber. The throne and the dais were ornate purple and black jewels were adorning the throne. Candlelit chandeliers hung suspended from the ceiling, and the huge room echoed with the movements of the hooded men. There was someone sitting up on the throne, dressed in a long, hooded vermilion robe, their face shrouded in darkness. The person sat waiting, looking impatient. Two smaller thrones were set up on either side of this person, who I assumed was the leader of the group. "You've done well once again. What have you brought us this time, servants of the many-legged god?" came a feminine voice from the center throne. "Two young spirits, mother of mothers. We bring them to you so that you may mold them to your purposes, to the purposes of the Dark Temple. May they bring you many years of servitude, and may their spirits and wills be easily broken." The hooded woman on the throne in the center raised her long hand up and summoned the men to come forward. They did, appearing cautious and afraid. Closer. They went closer. The mother of mothers, as the man had called her, did not seem pleased after all. She reached out and grabbed the man by the throat, and the other two backed away, trembling. "How exactly am I supposed to make a life-bonded servant of a dead boy?" My heart stopped in my chest for a moment hearing that. Brad had looked pale and his breathing had been shallow after the fall down the stairs. Maybe now it had stopped entirely. It looked pretty rough, after all. She continued to strangle the man with one strong hand, and I realized suddenly how tall she was. She towered over the man when she stood up, probably over 7 feet. She released her grip for a few moments to let him speak. "I'm sorry, Mother. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. It was Ned. The boy is obstinate, but I will teach him. I will teach him to be better. I swear. I will make him understand." "You peddle in excuses and lies, Solomon. Take your note for your next life. This is far less than the many-legged god deserves." The man began to scream in shrill cries of terror as he realized he was not going to get away. She was done with him. "No, we've been patient enough with you. You were told long ago to take responsibility for your charges. You've forsaken that responsibility." The man screamed, "No, please, give me another chance. Don't do this." The woman still holding him by the throat, tilting her head as she examined him. As the man thrashed and bucked, trying to get away from her, the woman began to emit a low, melodious, clicking sound. The movie Predator came out a few years later. I remember jumping when I heard the sound the creature in that movie had made because it was so similar. The other two women had been seated in their thrones upon the dais began to emit this low clicking groan as well. The sound grew louder and louder as the ground seemed to rumble and shake beneath my feet. I noticed then how the ornately carved stone walls had large sewer grate-sized holes in them, cleanly hollowed out and dark inside. From a few of these black holes came the shapes of creatures unlike anything I had seen before. They were huge, colorless millipedes with mouths full of sharp teeth. Their eyes glowed a pale blue shade, brimming with keen intelligence, but moreover, hunger. These creatures seemed to sniff the air and came down in weaving serpentine motions towards the man, still thrashing and screaming as the hooded woman held him by the neck. Their many legs skittered and clawed at the air. Tom was also fully awake now. I could see he was being held by the two remaining men and was fighting hard against them to get away, seeing the unnatural creatures that were lurking in this dark underground temple of despair. More and more of the giant millipede creatures were emerging from their holes, and they lunged at the hooded man and began to strike him in bloody, thirsty attacks, swarming him like a hive of snakes. Crimson fluid sprayed from his neck as they tore off his head and fought over it like hyenas, nipping and snapping at each other to gain the choicest morsels. All courage vanished from me as I saw this bewildering and terrifying scene occur before my eyes. Even at a distance, the worst of things obscured by darkness, I will never forget what I saw. I will have nightmares about it forever, especially knowing that those carnivorous creatures still reside down there, beneath my feet, in the bowels below the town. Once the bloodshed was over, the massive millipedes retreated back into their respective holes, and I saw that Tom had been knocked unconscious by one of the two remaining men. He was a goner, I realized. There's no way I could save him by myself. My best bet was to retreat, take my chances against Ned up in the house. I could try to get the authorities to come back and help if anyone believed me. But then I turned around and saw Ned was standing just behind me, an unlit torch held in his hands, which he looked about ready to swing at my head. Startled, I jumped back and lunged just as he lunged at me, swinging the torch. Luckily, he missed and wound up stumbling off balance. Since I was larger than him, I managed to use his momentum against him and pushed him while spinning out of the way. It's probably the best thing that could have possibly happened, since I had caught him off guard by turning around just as he was fully about to commit taking a swing at me. Ned missed completely and flew past me to wind up sprawled on the floor. I began to run immediately, knowing what was going to happen next. Surely enough, Ned began to scream for the other men to come and help, yelling, "Dad, he's getting away." As I ran, I heard the clicking, groaning, rumbling sound begin from the hooded women once again. The walls around me began to shake as I raced back through the underground tunnels towards the staircase. I just hoped I was right, and it was the way out. The entire tunnel was rumbling and quaking all around me, making me lose my balance and stumble as I ran. Behind me, I could hear the voices of my pursuers and could see the flickering light from their torches. First, I had a very strong feeling that I was not going to make it far, but it turned out I had the upper hand in the darkness, especially since I had marked my path earlier. It was easy enough to remember the first turns, so when I saw the pennies on the ground in the dim light, I knew which way to go instinctively. This threw off my pursuers and gave me hope. I realized they could not see me in the darkness once I was far enough away. They probably assumed I would get lost in the tunnels and I had no idea where I was going. Little did they know that I was headed straight back towards the exit. They slowed down behind me in the labyrinthine tunnels, and eventually their voices faded off into the distance. I made it back to the stairs and climbed up the steep, crumbling steps. At the top, I saw the secret door leading to the bathroom in the abandoned house where we'd come in. There was a chain on the other side we'd pulled to get in, hidden to look like a sink plug. I searched for a similar mechanism on this side. On the left, I finally found it. Pulling on it, I heard the door begin to slide open. Then voices were coming from behind me again, and the clicking sound like 1,000 legs on stone, insectile but louder. Looking down the stairs over my shoulder with a hurried glance, I saw the man from our history class who had told us about the Dark Temple. He was one of them, perhaps Ned's dad. Everything had been orchestrated to get us out here, to trap us down here. This place was an unholy sanctuary to some ancient and terrible god, subterranean and evil, the many-legged god. The people who lived down here had their own system, their own world. I wanted no part of it. They needed fresh blood, though, and they were intent on keeping their secret. The bespectacled man raced up the steps towards me, not seeing what was coming out of the stonework on either side of my head. I saw the holes bore out of the stone walls on either side of me, the size of sewer grates. And as the door slowly opened, I saw the creatures emerge from their burrows, closing in on me, their antennae twitching and mandibles clicking as they sniffed the air. The man reached me without seeing the creatures emerging from the shadows. He lunged at me, and I ducked just as he did so. All I heard was screaming as the creatures attacked him, too hungry to pass up a meal. His blood spraying the walls and my face with warm, crimson fluid. As the huge millipedes attacked the hooded man, I moved as quickly as I could, out through the open door, and ran. Ned's screams mixed with his father's as I emerged in the bathroom of the abandoned house in the woods. I pulled the chain quickly, causing the secret door to slam shut behind me, closing off the madness it concealed. The wailing cries of pain and terror shut off abruptly as it closed and left me with the sound of my own horrified heartbeat pounding in my ears. The light of the sun blinded me when I left the house. It had been so dark down in the tunnels. But my eyes adjusted and I made my way through the painful, thorny thicket and ran back home. As quickly as my legs would carry me, I ran, terrified of every sound I heard in the forest, scared of every squirrel that rustled in the leaves and every bird that chirped in the branches, thinking each one of them might be a millipede, burrowing its way up from the underground to chase after me. No wonder my parents had said to stay out of the woods after dark. This thought should have clued me into what happened next. I should have realized that my parents knew more than what they were saying right from the beginning. I got home panting and out of breath and begged my mom and dad to call the police. I began to tell them what had happened to Tom and Brad, and they just stopped me and shook their heads. "They're getting bolder again," said my father, his eyes thoughtful, staring off into the distance. "I told you they were past time for another cleansing," said my mother. They began making phone calls, stuffing rags into old liquor bottles. I assumed to make Molotov cocktails. Guns were being loaded and arranged on the table in an old, organized fashion, and grenades were being set beside them. I didn't even think my parents owned one gun, let alone this arsenal of warfare. I had never realized my parents were so badass. "It'll be dark soon. We need to get moving, son," said my mom, strapping on a Kevlar vest. "Now, where did you say that abandoned house was?"